Chapter 485. Flame 6. Eugene looked into the specter's eyes. It didn't matter to him whether the specter had drawn the right conclusion or not. But deep down, Eugene believed that the specter had come to an absolutely wrong conclusion. The specter was mistaken. Furthermore, he had no right to come to such a conclusion. Even if it were truly impossible, it wasn't the specter's place to challenge and judge that. Yet Eugene didn't immediately lash out with insults. Despite feeling immense annoyance and rage, he restrained himself, merely clenching his fists until they ached. It was because he saw a definite resolve in the specter's eyes. The specter had reached his decision based on his own clear convictions. Though Eugene had little desire to understand those convictions, he still respected them. If he changed his perspective on this matter and set aside his personal feelings, he could see that the specter's words weren't entirely wrong. If one died at the hands of the demon king of incarceration, their very existence would be ensnared. It would become impossible for them to reincarnate even in the next era. Eugene didn't know what the demon king of incarceration did with the souls he captured, but regardless, being deprived of reincarnation was an unspeakably horrific fate. Eugene knew that his existence was intertwined with countless circumstances and factors. If Vermouth had not come for him and reincarnated him, things might have been different. However, he was unique in his current existence because such things had taken place, and as such he could not waste his uniqueness in vain. 2 reincarnations. 1 had endowed Eugene with immense potential. If he could not fully awaken his potential in this era, perhaps it was better to look forward to the next world. But was that really true? Was it possible for him to realize his potential in the next era just by avoiding death at the hands of the demon king of incarceration? I don't know, Eugene realized. Ordinary people could not recall their past lives. Eugene was no different. During his life as Hamel, he never once recalled Agarotha's memories. But being utterly deprived of potential was different from having a chance to look forward to realizing it better the next time. If he met his demise at the hands of the demon king of incarceration, there would be no future opportunities. But if he died a different death, there was still a possibility for him to continue his struggle in the next life. After organizing his thoughts, Eugene let out a short sigh. However, he found that he still felt agitated. His emotions were riled up and they weren't about to settle that easily. He gave a few more sighs while scratching his head. Anise and Christina also remained silent. Was the specter's answer correct? The saints shared Eugene's sentiments on this matter. However, they didn't actively voice their opinions. This issue involved the fate of the world, and if Eugene sought advice, Anise and Christina would offer counsel for Eugene. This would be true not only for the saints but also for Sienna, Molin, and the members of the Lionheart family who shared Eugene's many secrets. But they would only offer advice. The final decision could not be made by anyone but Eugene. It was because he was special. He had equally as much potential as the expectations that weighed heavily on him. Originally, you would have died 300 years ago and that would have been the end. The specter spoke up, his gaze fixed on Eugene piercingly. Eugene remained silent, his eyebrows furrowed at the overt implication of those words. The meaning behind them was clear. The specter was referring to the events at Babel 300 years ago, regarding his encounter with Belial, the staff of incarceration. It was a one-time opportunity, a unique exception for the demon king of incarceration to have released your soul. It seems he's quite interested in you, but he seems even more interested in Vermouth, the specter added. Eugene couldn't say anything to counter the specter. It was because the opponent was Vermouth that the demon king of incarceration bothered to negotiate. Only Vermouth could have made a pact with the demon king of incarceration, said the specter. Eugene recalled his first meeting with the demon king of incarceration in the desert at Hamel's tomb. Your ancestor made an oath in exchange for freedom and now its end approaches. The wheel is about to turn again. Someday a pact must be made again. Who will take Vermouth's place to make the pact and stop the wheel? He had not understood the demon king of incarceration's words at the time, but he understood them now. Now that Vermouth is not here, if you were to die in Babel, who do you think could make a pact to retrieve your soul? Sienna, Molin, Anise, or Christina Rogerus? Asked the specter. The specter chuckled bitterly and shook his head. None of them can make a pact. The demon king of incarceration will not bother to make a pact with anyone other than Vermouth. Only Vermouth could negotiate a pact with the demon king of incarceration as an equal. And Vermouth made you the incarnation. He passed on the white flame formula, his magic memories, all that stuff, responded Eugene. I can't be certain why Vermouth did what he did. But I can speculate, said the specter, thinking of Vermouth. Vermouth had been sitting on the scar that Agaroth left on the Demon King of Destruction in the distant past at the end of the Age of Myth. Though the specter did not hold a conversation with Vermouth, he had sensed Vermouth's emotions to a certain degree. Initially there was loathing and later, compassion. It seems Vermouth also wants to test you, the specter said after a pause. No other conclusion seemed plausible. Vermouth was bound by the chains of incarceration, and he was sealed along with the Demon King of Destruction. He could not move freely. It was likely that Vermouth also had pinned his hopes on Eugene, that he would eventually come to defeat the Demon King of Incarceration and challenge the Demon King of Destruction. However, unlike 300 years ago, Vermouth could not fight alongside Eugene. It would have been challenging for him to even assess Eugene's qualifications. Thus, he turned the specter into the incarnation of destruction. I understand, Eugene finally spoke after a considerable silence. I understand how you became what you are. I understand why you're trying to kill me. But I absolutely cannot sympathize with your view. Vermouth wanted to test him as well. It was a terrible notion, but Eugene had to accept it. He knew that Vermouth Lionheart was just the sort to engage in such antics. Well, of course you would think so, the specter said with a smirk. Eugene clicked his tongue and glared at the specter before saying, I don't particularly want to understand you, but I do have one more lingering curiosity. Don't you think your approach is a bit extreme? If the specter wanted to test Eugene's qualifications to ascend Babel and challenge the Demon King of Incarceration, was it really necessary to wage a hasty war just to test him? I'll give you the benefit of the doubt for getting thrashed by the Demon King of Incarceration and going on a rampage after learning too much. But now we've talked, right? Now that I understand the situation a bit, shouldn't we start thinking differently? Eugene suggested. Like what? The specter asked. Let's put an end to this pointless war game for starters. Eugene glared at the specter as he spoke, aware that battles were still raging outside. You said it yourself. After meeting the Demon King of Incarceration, your perspective changed. Originally, you intended to play at war and then die by my hand, but now you say that's no longer possible. Ultimately, the specter's goal was to test Eugene. Could Eugene defeat the Demon King of Incarceration in battle? That was precisely the reason the specter was going all out against Eugene. Had Eugene not known the crux of the matter, he would have responded to the specter's murderous intent in kind. But now that he understood, was there a need to continue fighting? Was there really a necessity for them to kill each other? The specter was powerful. Even if his power wasn't entirely his own, Eugene acknowledged him as a powerhouse. If the specter lent him his strength as Eugene advanced to Pandemonium and Babel, and even when fighting against the Demon King of Incarceration. It's impossible, the specter said before Eugene could speak. He continued while shaking his head, the chains of incarceration bind the Demon King of Destruction. My power is a mere byproduct of the Demon King of Destruction, so it wouldn't be much help in a battle against the Demon King of Incarceration. It might even hinder others or put them in danger. But your Moonlight Sword might just work. The specter pointed to the Moonlight Sword, taking note of the dangerous blend of elements within its radiance. Its power was so potent that even he, as the incarnation of destruction, felt threatened by its ominous light. Eugene looked down at the Moonlight Sword in his hand. He knew to be careful not to get others swept up in his attacks when using the sword. The light it emitted was extremely dangerous and deadly. Just the Moonlight Sword alone might not pose a big problem. Eugene was even more adept with it than Vermouth was 300 years prior, and he had even changed its very nature. But if the specter were to join the fray as well, Sienna and the Saints would have to struggle with all their might just to stay in the fight, or else they would face the danger of being evacuated forcefully if not careful. If I fail to defeat you here and die, Eugene grimaced as he spoke, what will you do afterward? Will you personally kill the others too? It's better to leave everyone with the possibility of the next era rather than just you, came the answer. And after that? Asked Eugene. He was no longer grimacing. Instead, all emotion had drained from his face and his golden eyes had turned icy. The specter gave a dry laugh and shook his head. I'm dying, admitted the specter. It was a sudden statement but one without a trace of falsehood. Well, not quite, death but dissipation. Either way, it won't be long before I'm gone, continued the specter. It doesn't sound like you intend to take your own life, Eugene said. It's a type of dissipation that comes regardless of my will. Isn't that more fitting? The dark power of destruction even leads the bound demons to self-destruct. And I'm not just bound by that dark power but mixed with it, answered the specter. The specter's soul was created by Amelia, who gathered and mixed various souls to form it. His soul was blended with dark power and influenced by Vermouth's will, leading to his transformation into the incarnation of destruction. It was only natural that his existence wasn't stable. You might say I'm too extreme, but that's only natural. I have no choice but to be extreme. I am destined to dissipate soon, but that doesn't matter. I should not have existed in the first place. However, I do have memories even if they are not originally mine and the emotions that come with them. And after realizing all of it wasn't truly mine, I've also developed new emotions, the specter said. Eugene could understand. What I ultimately want isn't much different from your desire. I wish you would kill all the demon kings and achieve what couldn't be achieved 300 years ago. I want you to reach a complete stable peace this time. Fulfill the silly future you and your comrades dreamed of in the Devildom. And rescue that overly secretive bastard Vermouth and give him a good thrashing, he continued. Eugene respected the decision the specter made. If it can't be achieved in this era, at least carry those aspirations into the next. That's why I'll use all my strength to kill you. If you're weaker than me, you'll never be able to defeat the demon king of incarceration, the specter declared. The specter had made the best decision he could in the current circumstances. In the end, he could not see the future. He had no idea whether Eugene would challenge the demon king of incarceration and win or lose. You asked if there's a need to continue fighting. You might think that way, but I can't. To me, this world is my last. And even if I weren't facing imminent dissipation. Here the specter paused. Eugene gripped his sword. Taking a breath, the specter continued. I shouldn't be necessary in the battles you will face. You are the war god Agaroth Hamel and you are Eugene Lionheart, the hero. You shouldn't need the help of someone like me. The holy sword started to shine. Right, said Eugene. The moonlight sword started glowing with pale moonlight. Fuck off, Eugene yelled. The sudden curse caused the specter's expression to stiffen. Because I was Agaroth? Because I was Hamel? Because I am the hero? Those aren't reasons enough for me to make a resolution or be considered grand, Eugene said. Dark flames started fluttering again. Am I special? Yes, I am special. But killing demons, slaying demon kings, saving the world. Having such thoughts and resolutions aren't exclusive to gods, heroes, or warriors, he continued. He didn't like it. If there's no hope in this era, then wait for the next? What about those who fought and died 300 years ago? What about those in this era who've resolved to defeat the demon kings? Eugene questioned. He simply didn't like it. I get that you're desperate. I understand your decision isn't entirely wrong. But I don't like your decision and I hate your attitude of talking about the next time. So I'll do as I please, just like you are doing what you please, Eugene concluded. The flames around him fluttered like a lion's mane, and the flames rising behind him formed a single wing. Let's stop testing the waters, Eugene declared. He released the two swords. But neither the holy sword nor the moonlight sword fell or faded. The two blades hovered in midair, and the light they emitted slowly began merging with Eugene's dark flames. I'll stop holding back and really go for it. Let's end that too. Eugene slowly raised his left hand. He pointed his fist towards the specter, slowly turned his fist so that the palm faced the air and raised his middle finger. If you want to kill me and test me naturally, you should surpass my full strength, Eugene declared. He allocated all the available cards he had for a decisive win and to kill the opponent without a doubt. He could not reverse ignition once it was activated. It would last for about 10 minutes, after which he would be hit with the recoil. He would be incapacitated and combat would become impossible. He could draw the divine sword 3 times. He had drawn it once already, so he had 2 more swings remaining. The original plan was to actively use the moonlight sword and the holy sword while replacing ignition with prominence. In doing so, he could continue to battle and wear down the specter's strength. He would wield the divine sword when the specter was visibly weakened. He would fight with the active support of the saints, and if the battlefield stabilized, with Sienna's support as well. He could not use ignition unless he was certain of an absolute kill. Originally, ignition was a finishing move meant to ensure the opponent's death, with the readiness that failure would mean one's own demise. The strategy to win would be to activate ignition and deliver the final blow with the divine sword when the Spectre was at his last straw, with the support of the Saints and Sienna. This had been Eugene's formula for victory. But now he set his original plan aside. What the Spectre, and by extension Vermouth, wanted to see and test was Eugene's full strength. The Spectre was dying. "The divine sword," said Eugene. He pushed his right hand into his chest. "Ignition is next, so brace yourself," Eugene said confidently. The Spectre couldn't help but let out a hollow laugh. Despite the dialogue aimed at understanding each other just moments ago, ultimately nothing had changed. The Spectre appreciated this unchangeability. It meant that Eugene respected the Spectre's decision. There was no time to express gratitude. The light of the swords wielded by the god of war and the hero transformed into miracles through faith and reverence. His strikes cleaved the darkness in two. Chapter 486. Flame 7. Bonus image. The light threatened to overcome him. The Spectre knew that Eugene had not used ignition. However, that didn't mean the sword was any less lethal than powered by Eugene Lionheart's full power. In the first place, ignition was a technique that caused the core to surge and break through the limit of mana output. The divine sword utilized a different form of power, and as such, using ignition did not amplify the power of the divine sword. The crimson light of Eugene's divine sword was the essence of his special qualities and potential. It embodied the faith of the war god Ogoroth and the reverence for the hero Eugene Lionheart. The Spectre had experienced the power of the divine sword at the beginning of the battle. Like the miracle formed through the unification of the Moonlight Sword and the Holy Sword, the divine sword could not be avoided once it was drawn. Moreover, the divine sword also carried the miracles of slaying evil and certain death with it. That was the divine power of the arrogant and wild war god Ogoroth. In the battlefields of the Age of Myth, Ogoroth's opponents were mostly demons and demon kings, which was why the sword he wielded had to embody the divine will to cut through evil. However, the current form of the divine sword did not match the power wielded by Ogoroth when he was at his peak. It was still incomplete. While this deep red sword light might transcend space and time, it could not truly reproduce the acts of evil slaying and certain death in their fullest sense. Yet, having already been struck by the divine sword once before, the Spectre knew the power it carried. His personal experiences as well as the intuition and instincts he gained from becoming the incarnation of destruction allowed him to thoroughly reassess the divine sword. This blade of the divine sword was rough. It seemed to grind rather than cut. The edge of the divine sword was jagged and chaotic, like the teeth of a beast or a saw. As such, it left deep wounds in its opponents. Furthermore, it inflicted pain beyond a simple cut, similar to pouring and rubbing salt or shattered glass into the wound. A curse, the Spectre concluded as he moved. Resentment and venomous grudge. The anger, hatred, and murderous intent were carried through the eras and transformed Eugene's divine power into poison. This was not the divine power of Ogoroth but the divine power of Eugene Lionheart. The faith accumulated in the hero of this era, rather than the war god, was sublimated into divine power. It's unbefitting of the hero. The Spectre entertained such a thought as he watched the sword light coming closer. It was a sentiment shared by many who had seen Eugene's flames and strength. But though it may not seem fitting, Eugene's sword still cut through evil in a steadfast manner. No, rather it ground them to shreds and tore them apart. In that sense, the current divine sword wasn't much different from Ogoroth's divine sword. Eugene's divine sword was intended to kill demons and demon kings. Then it should not be avoided. Strictly speaking, while the Spectre was not a demon king, he was obstructing the hero like one, and he intended to kill the hero like a demon king. When he first saw the divine sword, he had failed to respond properly, or rather, it had been impossible to respond. The divine sword could not be avoided, and as such he had been stuck in a dilemma, wondering whether to defend against the attack or attempt to counter. The Spectre had ended up clumsily launching an attack of his own, only for it to break instantly without any resistance. Now there was no need to ponder between the two choices. The Spectre immediately grasped his sword. Various colors mixed together to create a chaotic-looking blade formed from dark power. The Spectre utilized Vermouth's white flame formula. The seemingly endless surge of dark power took the shape of flames, and the ominous power whipped around the specter like a lion's mane. The divine sword collided with the demonic sword. But unlike before, the demonic sword did not shatter in vain. The endless supply of dark power continuously repaired the blade even as it was torn to shreds. It's different, thought Eugene. He noticed that the demonic sword itself was the same as before. However, the power it carried, the precision with which it struck, and even the specter's manipulation of dark power were significantly better than before. Both Eugene and the specter came to a realization at that moment. I'm getting stronger, the specter thought. Was it because he was becoming more accustomed to the power as the incarnation of destruction? Or was Vermouth providing him with more power? Did Vermouth want to test Eugene's limits that badly? The specter resolved, if that's what you wish for, then I... The specter hadn't yet reached the point of dissolution. He could still fight. He was firm in his resolve, and he was determined to use all of his power to kill Eugene. Try it, Eugene challenged, his lips twisted with a mix of disdain and challenge. Vermouth, you bastard. If you, from whichever hole you're hiding in, want to see how strong I am. There was no sound amidst the clash between the divine sword and the demonic sword, but their exchanges were causing a phenomenon. The space, a chaotic mix in the rift of dimensions, was disintegrating. The darkness that lay like a backdrop to their dance started to blend with divine and dark powers, and as a result, the space was beginning to be dyed with various colors. Hamel! Anise screamed in horror. Eugene knew what she was worried about. However, he didn't cease his attack. Whoosh! With a roar, the darkness vanished, leaving behind a void of pure white where Eugene and the specter stood alone. The void split open, leading to another collapse of dimensional layers. Exiting could mean becoming lost in an unknown dimension or being sucked into an unfathomable dark abyss. Eugene wasn't a fan of either outcome. Just before the dimensional layers completely disintegrated, Prominence blazed black. He had not lost his connection to the outside world. He was still connected via the light thread, and the flames of Prominence connected him with the light of the saints. He leaped. The scenery changed instantly. He was no longer standing in the disintegrating space. Instead, Eugene found himself back above Horia. The first thing he saw was the scar in the sky. It bubbled as if it was boiling, then contracted before disappearing. He looked behind him. Horia lay in ruins. Where there had been some semblance of a city, now there was nothing. Thousands of Nur had trampled and demolished every building, flattening the area. Below him, there was no longer a distinction between buildings and streets. A horde of monsters were roaring and rampaging wildly. The Liberation Army stood in front of the rampaging monsters. Melkith stood out on the battlefield. Although she was a wizard, she wasn't at the rear of the army but at the forefront, clearing the way. Lovelion's pantheon was in full effect. He summoned numerous creatures from atop it to block the advance of the Nur. Gilead had dismounted his steed and was leading the White Lions, breaking through the summoned creatures into the ranks of the monsters. Sion was right beside his father, and they were followed by Alchester, Ivatar, Amon, Ortis, and Ivik. The commanders were actively participating in the battle, and the wizards and priests continuously cast spells and prayers. The battle was in full effect in the sky as well. Knights on wyverns, pegasi, and summoned beasts were engaging in fierce combat with the Nur. The banners of Lionheart were visible along with several others. Raphael held the reins of a giant Pegasus while swinging his claymore to decapitate a Nur, while Carmen's flames engulfed others nearby. Gion was seen rallying the knights, and Genos too charged at the Nur in his coat of red flames. Darkness flickered. It was the effect of the demon eye of darkness. Though Seal's eyes were bloodshot from strain, she continued to unleash the power of her demon eye. Eugene's gaze shifted further back. The universe seemed to have opened up in the sky behind Sienna, and the space behind her was filled with the debris of collapsed walls and buildings. Sienna had enjoyed using such magic even 300 years prior. She would imbue mana into objects of mass and crudely hammer her enemies with them. The most renowned of these spells was Meteor, a spell considered the pinnacle of war magic. However, even an archwizard couldn't single-handedly bring down meteors from the distant sky. It was near impossible without the aid of other wizards or a magic circle that was prepared beforehand. But this was a limitation only for other archwizards. Sienna could not be bound by the same restrictions. With her level of magic, she didn't need to pull suitable meteors from the sky. If she needed a meteor, she could create one on the ground and enhance the impact it would create with magic to simulate a cosmic fall. You should at least say something when you're leaving, Sienna grumbled, pouting. She waved her hand dismissively at Eugene. Eugene understood immediately. He was in the trajectory she was drawing with her magic, so she was telling him to dodge the attack. With a thunderous roar, a massive meteor crafted by magic left the makeshift universe. It traveled at a speed so fast that it merely cast a fleeting shadow on the ground. Not wanting to get entangled in the devastating attack, Eugene leaped high into the sky to avoid the meteor's parabolic path. The meteor crashed amidst the Nur army. The massive object contained enough force to obliterate an entire city, and it was concentrated only on the Nur. But despite the meteor's immense power, the Nur weren't fully decimated. Their screams transformed into dark power and offset the crushing impact of the meteor. "These bastards are like cockroaches," Eugene muttered. These monsters were more obnoxious than the ones he had seen 300 years ago or the demonic beasts he had just slain a while ago. Repulsive, hard to kill, and swarming in vast numbers. "Can't you just clear them out?" Eugene asked. "I'd prefer not to repeat the same conversation," the specter replied, standing nonchalantly on the opposite side of the sky. The demonic sword's light was fading, but the flames around the specter were growing even more ferocious and ominous. "What, you are testing them as well?" Eugene asked mockingly. "You're not going to march into Helmuth alone and climb Babel, are you?" the specter countered. "No reason I couldn't. At my current level, I could massacre even the high-ranking demons," Eugene retorted with a scoff. The specter didn't deny it. Among the demons in Helmuth, only Gavid Lindman and Wargiabella could pose a threat to Eugene. "Are you planning to ignore the resolve of those inspired by you, the hero, to come here?" the specter mocked. "You piece of—" Eugene's face contorted and his earlier smirk disappeared. The specter's words were a twist on what Eugene had said earlier. He hadn't expected his own words to be thrown back at him like this. "Trust in us," came a voice. He wasn't sure whether it was Anise or Christina. Could have been either of them. "We're living in a time when it's hard to even believe in gods. How easy do you think it is to trust others?" Eugene responded. "Please refrain from saying such blasphemous words." She would imbue mana into objects of mass and crudely hammer her enemies with them. The most renowned of these spells was Meteor, a spell considered the pinnacle of war magic. However, even an archwizard couldn't single-handedly bring down meteors from the distant sky. It was near impossible without the aid of other wizards or a magic circle that was prepared beforehand. But this was a limitation only for other archwizards. Sienna could not be bound by the same restrictions. With her level of magic, she didn't need to pull suitable meteors from the sky. If she needed a meteor, she could create one on the ground and enhance the impact it would create with magic to simulate a cosmic fall. "You should at least say something when you're leaving," Sienna grumbled, pouting. She waved her hand dismissively at Eugene. Eugene understood immediately. He was in the trajectory she was drawing with her magic, so she was telling him to dodge the attack. With a thunderous roar, a massive meteor crafted by magic left the makeshift universe. It traveled at a speed so fast that it merely cast a fleeting shadow on the ground. Not wanting to get entangled in the devastating attack, Eugene leaped high into the sky to avoid the meteor's parabolic path. The meteor crashed amidst the Nur army. The massive object contained enough force to obliterate an entire city, and it was concentrated only on the Nur. But despite the meteor's immense power, the Nur weren't fully decimated. Their screams transformed into dark power and offset the crushing impact of the meteor. "These bastards are like cockroaches," Eugene muttered. These monsters were more obnoxious than the ones he had seen 300 years ago or the demonic beasts he had just slain a while ago. Repulsive, hard to kill, and swarming in vast numbers. "Can't you just clear them out?" Eugene asked. "I'd prefer not to repeat the same conversation," the specter replied, standing nonchalantly on the opposite side of the sky. The demonic sword's light was fading, but the flames around the specter were growing even more ferocious and ominous. "What, you are testing them as well?" Eugene asked mockingly. "You're not going to march into Helmuth alone and climb Babel, are you?" the specter countered. "No reason I couldn't. At my current level, I could massacre even the high-ranking demons," Eugene retorted with a scoff. The specter didn't deny it. Among the demons in Helmuth, only Gavid Lindman and Wargiabella could pose a threat to Eugene. Are you planning to ignore the resolve of those inspired by you, the hero, to come here? The specter mocked. You piece of... Eugene's face contorted and his earlier smirk disappeared. The specter's words were a twist on what Eugene had said earlier. He hadn't expected his own words to be thrown back at him like this. Trust in us, came a voice. He wasn't sure whether it was Anise or Christina. Could have been either of them. We're living in a time when it's hard to even believe in gods. How easy do you think it is to trust others? Eugene responded. Please refrain from saying such blasphemous words. Eugene's white flame formula had evolved, and he had awakened the divine sword. Since then, activating ignition wasn't just about overloading the core anymore. This galaxy was the embodiment of all possibilities Eugene had reached through his past lives as Ogoroth and Hamel. This wasn't a simple skill or a spell. Just like the divine sword, this was a miracle manifested by Eugene. You prepare yourself as well, Eugene declared while immersed in the galaxy. Did you already know? The specter asked, covering his heart with his right hand. Noir Giabella and Gavid Lindman are watching us high above this place in the sky. I didn't expect them to come watch in person, Eugene muttered without surprise. They were so high up that their presence was barely perceptible, but Eugene could feel them now. Noir was hiding in the Giabella face and Gavid was standing outside. Noir, he knows you are Hamel. But Gavid doesn't know you're Hamel, the specter said. That idiot's pretty clueless. In the first place, I did hide my identity in front of him, Eugene responded. You're not planning to hide anymore? The specter asked. After coming this far? Eugene responded with a mocking smile. The expanding universe that had been surging and swirling inside him came to a standstill. Lightning streaked across the stars, and the universe compressed around Eugene. Eugene began. There was no need to look up. Gavid would be looking down from the sky anyway. There was no need to shout it either. Gavid would be listening. Hamel, Eugene said with a smile. With a mighty roar, Prominence soared high and pierced the sky, instantly reaching Noir and Gavid. In an instant, the shape of Prominence shrank rapidly and transformed. No longer was it a wing of black flames. Now it was a wing formed from the dark blue and orange hues of the nebula. It contained absurd power. Even the demon kings of 300 years past would feel fear if they stood in Eugene's presence. But paradoxically, this overwhelmingly dominant power was also majestic and beautiful. Like the night sky illuminated by countless stars, the Milky Way created by flowing stars, or the auroras seen in the polar regions, Eugene now harbored a beauty beyond human comprehension. The specter's fingers dug into his chest. His white flame formula was the original version passed down to him from Vermouth. The white flame formula, which was inherited by the Lionheart family for 300 years, was designed by Vermouth to be suitable for his descendants. The original white flame formula wasn't something that ordinary humans could practice because Vermouth's existence was anything but ordinary. The specter was no different. He was not human and was far from ordinary. If the white flame formula inherited by the Lionheart family, the one Eugene learned, allowed one to shine like a brilliant star, then the star Vermouth harbored was a malevolent body. The beautiful white flames and the flowing mane of the lion were dyed the color of nothingness. When the specter's 5 fingers dug into the chest, the malevolent star went berserk. The doors to his core were opened and the dark power of destruction poured out. No, to be more precise, the specter's core became one with the demon king of destruction. The rampaging malevolent star became the specter's core. If Eugene possessed an alien beauty, then the specter held an unknown ominousness. All sorts of colors mixed and blazed in his flames, and once all the colors blended, the color of destruction turned into a vacuous white. Haha. The specter became submerged in the white flames. With one hand still on his chest, he laughed. The omnipotence he felt now was incomparable to when he recklessly caused his dark power to surge in the Samar forest. So this is how it feels, the specter whispered softly while gazing at Eugene. With nebulae as his wing and wrapped in galaxies, Eugene still had his hand on his chest. Unlike the laughing specter, there was no hint of mirth in his golden glowing eyes. But now both Eugene and the specter felt the same thing. They were both certain that they could kill their opponent. Chapter 487, Flame 8. When Eugene Lionheart grasped his chest with his right hand, or rather even before that, a thought crossed Gavid's mind. He observed the battle between Eugene and the Spectre, the flurry of precise strikes that split a single breath into hundreds or even thousands, and how he would deflect an attack at the last moment and control the opponent's movements with his own. The techniques Eugene used were far more sophisticated and powerful than those of the Spectre. Gavid was familiar with all of Eugene's movements. Although they had evolved far beyond the forms he remembered, it wasn't hard for him to recognize where they originally stemmed from. He didn't believe it. He thought it was impossible. Even when he set aside his emotions and thought about it rationally, he arrived at the same conclusion. So what if Eugene Lionheart was using Hamel's techniques? What was so strange about that? Hamel's techniques had been passed down in the Lionheart family. Then what about the fact that Eugene far surpassed the Spectre in those techniques despite the fact that the Spectre possessed Hamel's memories? It wasn't hard to figure out either. Eugene Lionheart was a genius who was praised as the reincarnation of the Great Vermouth. It wouldn't have been impossible for him to develop the techniques he inherited as his own and further enhance them. However, Gavid had to accept what he didn't want to believe when he saw it. Even though it seemed impossible, there was no other explanation. What Eugene Lionheart was using wasn't something that could be passed down as a technique. Gavid thought Eugene might be drawing another blade of strange light like before, but he saw no crimson light bursting forth from Eugene's chest. Instead, flames violently erupted from Eugene's chest, and his mana started to surge wildly. Ignition, Gavid murmured in a trembling voice. How should he accept that Eugene Lionheart was using ignition? Was there no other explanation than the absurd possibility that flitted through his mind? I am. It came as a whisper from far below. Gavid's ears, wide open, caught Eugene's voice. Without realizing it, Gavid leaned forward and held his breath as he waited for Eugene's following words. Hamel. He was stupefied by the declaration. Qua. A black wing formed from flames appeared in front of Gavid. The single wing pierced the sky and Gavid felt dizzy and staggered backward. The wing in front of him resembled a sword of black, burning flame. My goodness! Gavid uttered, shocked. The declaration alone had been enough to shock him completely, but the power contained in the wing shocked him even further. Came to him as a different form of astonishment. Even a dragon might not possess mana as destructive and vast as this. Was this really a power allowed to a mere human? Was this a power that could truly be wielded by a human? No, it's not just mana. There's something else mixed in, Gavid realized. Before he could delve into the nature of that power, the wing shrank. But even though the wing disappeared before his eyes, the remnants of the power left by the flame lingered in front of him. Gavid swallowed hard and looked down. The black wing of flame had now transformed into a nebula-like shape as it fluttered behind Eugene. Even at that moment, Eugene was not looking at Gavid. Only Gavid was looking down at Eugene. Looking down on him? Gavid mused. Was that really the case? Gavid clenched his fist as he felt a chilling shudder. Although it was true that he was physically looking down on Eugene from this height, he couldn't shake the feeling that he stood on equal footing, if not lesser, with Eugene in spirit. Hamel of extermination, Gavid muttered under his breath. During his time 3 centuries ago, Vermouth Lionheart was revered by humans as the hero and despised by demons as Vermouth of Despair. Alongside him was a band of madmen who went out to kill all the demon kings and conquer the Devildom. One particular individual had left a profound impression on Gavid among Vermouth's companions. Hamel of extermination. Was it because he was strong? Certainly, Hamel was powerful, but not more so than Vermouth, nor had he been stronger than Gavid. Yet Gavid had been fearful of Hamel. Their first encounter had been when Hamel and Sienna of Calamity came out for reconnaissance. Naturally, Gavid planned and attempted to kill them both on the spot. He had no reason not to take this perfect opportunity to reduce the enemy's forces. But he had failed. It wasn't due to a lack of power. If it had been merely about strength, Gavid was much stronger than Hamel and Sienna at the time. If it had not been for Hamel's peculiar technique, Gavid could have killed them both effortlessly. Ignition. Hamel would place a hand over his heart and induce a self-destructive, incredible surge in his core. It was a technique of resolve, used with the determination to kill the opponent at all costs. It was a technique that would result in certain death for the user if they failed to kill the opponent. It was truly an incredibly foolish technique. 300 years ago, Gavid had been overwhelmed by Hamel, who had prepared to die in the battle. Despite being superior in terms of power, He was intimidated and was afraid of Hamel's murderous intent. That was why Gavid couldn't forget Hamel. Gavid bore the nickname of Blade of Incarceration and declared himself a knight of the Demon King of Incarceration. Retreating from a human he perceived as being weaker than him out of fear and pressure was a humiliation he wouldn't experience again in his lifetime. He had wanted to repay that humiliation in Babel. But he couldn't. Hamel died before reaching the throne room of incarceration. Reincarnation? Gavid questioned. The cycle of life, death and rebirth was nothing special. But for Hamel to retain his memories through reincarnation and to reincarnate as a descendant of Vermouth and as the hero, that could not be a mere coincidence. Gavid mulled over Eugene's declaration while grinding his teeth. The spectre used ignition at the same moment Eugene did. The spectre shouldn't possess a mana-infused core like humans, but it still seemed possible for him to rampage. Gavid clenched his fist as he saw the flames of dark power pouring out of the spectre. He saw the color of the flames and how they resembled that of the Demon King of Destruction. The spectre's flames soon transformed into a vacuous white. After the shock came irritation and anger. "You," Gavid said through clenched teeth. He began to understand things that had been incomprehensible before. It had been utterly baffling for him as to why Norgiabella, the queen of the night demons, was so obsessed with Eugene Lionheart. He had questioned why she showed him kindness and now he understood. Because of his strength? His good looks? There could have been numerous reasons for Noir's favoritism towards Eugene, but even considering all that, her obsession and kindness had seemed excessive. But everything made sense if Eugene was truly the reincarnation of Hamel. Norgiabella's obsession with and kindness toward Hamel had been evident even 300 years ago, and she never made an effort to hide it. She was even the only demon who mourned Hamel's death in Babel by wearing a black dress, signifying her mourning. Gavid gritted his teeth and turned his head. "Of course you knew." His words, filled with irritation and anger, were abruptly cut short. Gavid was taken aback and his eyes widened at Noir's unusual expression. Noir's purple eyes were bloodshot. Her lips, which she had chewed in thought, were torn and bloodied, and the marks of tears were evident on her cheeks. Moreover, tears continued to flow freely down her cheeks. But they weren't ordinary tears. Noir was shedding tears of blood. Her face, which was always plastered with a deceitful smile, now bore no hint of joy. Gavid had known Noir for hundreds of years, yet he had never seen her wear such an expression. Gavid didn't know what to say. But was it because Eugene declared himself as Hamel? It seemed Noir had known Eugene's true identity for a while. So why was she showing such expression and emotion? Emotion. As Gavid thought this, he calmed himself and scrutinized Noir's expression. He saw a mix of various emotions. Among them, one stood out prominently. Despair. Noir was aware that Gavid was watching her. She knew that her expressions and the emotions she displayed were incomprehensible to Gavid. But so what? Right now, Gavid's gaze and judgment held no value to Noir. Her head was a mess. The throbbing pain she felt made it feel as if her head would burst at any moment. No, in fact, her head had already burst several times. Noir gasped for breath and turned her attention to her hand. She had penetrated her temple with her fingers and mashed her brain to a pulp. She clenched the fingers smeared with blood and brain matter. I know. She remembered too many unwanted memories. She saw monsters charging with horrific screams, people who stood unwaveringly against them. And from above, dominating the battlefield, boosting morale had been. The throbbing intensified. Noir bit her lip again and licked the blood seeping from her torn lips. These were memories from a distant past. They belonged not to Norgiabella but to another being. The scattered scenes began to connect. Noir gently caressed her cheek with her bloodied hand. She didn't want to recall such memories. Eugene and the spectre came to a mutual realization of a certain kill. The moment this thought struck them, they moved. The moonlight sword and the holy sword emitted different lights. A blindingly brilliant light enveloped the holy sword, while a grim, pale luminance wrapped around the moonlight sword. Using ignition did not necessarily strengthen the holy sword, but both the holy sword and the moonlight sword were influenced by the amplification of Eugene's power through ignition. It was because the power emitted by both swords was mixed with Eugene's flames. They are different from Vermouth's swords, the spectre realized. The holy sword had not been as radiant in Vermouth's hands, and the light of the moonlight sword had not been as intense. The specter paid attention to the light mingling with the holy sword and the moonlight sword. These two swords were clearly influenced by Eugene, almost as if they were extensions of his own limbs. Could this transformation also be part of the uniqueness that Vermouth noticed? Even if that may be the case, the specter thought, his task remained unchanged. Despite having had a conversation, his decision did not waver. If anything, the discussion only solidified his resolve. Power surged from the core connected to the Demon King of Destruction. The specter too grasped two swords. The moment he gripped the air, demonic swords burning in white appeared in his hands. Eugene vanished. Was it a spatial leap through prominence? No, he was merely moving at an extremely high speed. Eugene didn't need to use spatial leaps at this distance. Moving was faster for him than using magic to leap. However, the specter reacted in time. As the incarnation of destruction, his power was distinctly amplified as his dark power became more rampant. The surging dark power provided the specter with intuition on how to move before he could consciously decide. It was comparable to the divinity and intuitive insight of the war god. The pair of swords met in harmony. The beginning was flamboyant and resembled a dance of swords, but the momentum shifted dramatically after a single clash. There was a flurry of slashes. It was difficult, almost impossible, to track each other's movements by sense alone. They needed to foresee the future before even feeling the slash. They needed to predict how the opponent would swing their sword, how to counter it, how to deflect that counter, how to penetrate the following deflection, how to press on, and so forth. The endless battle of wits continued within their minds. Even accelerating their thoughts to stretch out reality felt insufficient. During a single clash, dozens of confrontations were already computed in the minds of Eugene and the specter. I see it. It wasn't in the literal sense, for relying on sight to judge was too slow. Yet at that moment Eugene felt as if he could see it. His eyes emitted a divine light. He was no stranger to battle. If one were to trace back the karma entwined with his soul, he might have experienced enough wars to grow weary of them. In fact, the divinity that Eugene possessed was born from those very experiences. In battle he was undefeated. In war he was ever victorious. Thus now Eugene's intuition illuminated the path to victory in combat. It transcended the computations of thought. Eugene let his instincts guide his sword, knowing even a moment of hesitation would only block the way. Even if there seemed to be nothing in the direction he was stabbing, he proceeded. And as if drawn to it, the specter found himself in the path of the thrust. The tip of the holy sword extended like a spear of light, piercing through the specter's shoulder and causing it to disintegrate. Yet the specter did not halt. White flames pushed back the light of the holy sword. Rumbly. A massive explosion followed. Dark power spewed like blood from the specter's disintegrated shoulder, fueling the flame around him even further. Almost half of the city's sky was engulfed in the specter's white flames. These flames then transformed into a colossal sword, large enough to bisect the city in a single strike. But its size was an underestimation of the sword's power. There was enough power contained in the sword to split an entire nation. The giant sword moved as the specter twisted his waist and sliced the sky. At the same time, prominence emitted light. There was a flash from the nebula, unleashing hundreds of eclipses. Despite the barrage, the demonic sword's advance was unstoppable. Eugene raised the moonlight sword while gritting his teeth. Rumbly. A fierce lunar light mixed with the cosmos. The blade of the moonlight sword could no longer be considered mere moonlight. The universe that enveloped Eugene extended into the sword. The empty sword also became involved, and the flames, amplified by ignition, started to overlap. In an instant, the empty sword was formed as a dark mass after being activated to its full potential. It was significantly smaller compared to the specter's demonic sword, but size alone did not determine strength. The more refined concentration of power, coupled with prayer, makes it stronger, Eugene declared inwardly. Eugene's prayer transformed into a miracle. Eugene's limit with the empty sword had been 5 layers. Any more beyond that was deemed impossible because the form of mana would collapse. Yet now, a miracle born from Eugene's prayer added another layer to the empty sword. The mana's collapse was sustained by a miracle and the sparks coalesced. A 6-layered empty sword. It didn't grow larger but became thinner as the layers compressed onto the blade. With a crackling sound, the moonlight sword burned black and bisected the demonic sword. Chapter 488. Flame 9. Most of those still in the city could not be called ordinary. They hailed from the most renowned knightly orders and mercenary bands across the continent, including the Samar rainforest, the magical towers and monasteries. They were among the top talents of the knights, mercenaries, warriors, wizards and priests. Not every single one of them was necessarily a prodigy or genius, but it was still undeniable that everyone on the battlefield was extraordinary. Yet none of them could comprehend the phenomenon unfolding in the sky. Even those geniuses whose talents far exceeded ordinary bounds were at a loss. The sky continued to flicker along with thunderous booms. They could barely see figures whizzing by, and stars bloomed in the darkness as if the night sky had descended. Then everything suddenly turned white and bizarrely shaped lightning streaked across the sky, leaving a trail behind. All of this happened within mere seconds. What they saw was too surreal to be the work of humans. But they had no choice but to believe, for the incomprehensible phenomenon continued in the sky. Below the phenomenon, those engaged in battles with winged Nur in the sky could not help but shudder at the sight above them, despite their best efforts to ignore it. It was like silent thunder, for what else could describe such a force brushing past overhead? The fighters felt incredulous power flitting over their heads. Pegasi and wyverns, among other monsters, had their fear temporarily suppressed through holy and magical means, allowing them to confront the ominous monsters. This was necessary not only to engage the Nur but also because the battle raging above in the higher skies would instill a greater terror in the monsters. The hero? Raphael thought as he looked up. Even the Crusader, who was more stunned than his usual boldness, could not help but flinch. He was even secretly envious of Apollo for having been stripped of fear. Raphael forced his trembling hands to grip the reins tighter as he wondered, is it appropriate to call him just the hero? The clash of the colossal forces caused the sky to light up as if the god of light had personally descended. The sight overwhelmed Raphael. The difference he felt was palpable. Although he had long known the difference between him and Eugene, he thought that the gap between them had widened even further. Eugene Lionheart was the chosen hero of the light, and he was fit to be called the incarnation of light. Even so, he should still be human. Yet he no longer seemed human. A god. Raphael unwittingly uttered. What other words were befitting to describe an existence transcending humanity? Was he fit to be called anything other than a god? Yet such acknowledgement was forbidden. Rafael Martinez was a holy knight entirely devoted to the light. Although he knew that he was a fanatic, he never once found his zeal shameful or harbored any doubts about it. There were many different faiths across the continent, but only the worship of light was absolute, singular, and true. It should be so. Yet now Raphael felt a different kind of faith towards Eugene, one not related to the light. It was a sacrilegious feeling. In this world, all gods other than the light were heretical. That was what he had believed all his life. Raphael exhaled shakily and drew the cross in the air. But he wasn't the only one feeling this way. Devout priests and paladins, all ardent believers in the light, felt a different kind of faith in Eugene. They felt a different kind of faith in the hero as he stood against a demon king in the sky. Have I been blinded? The thought flashed through Raphael's mind, but it didn't take long for him to arrive at a conclusion. He swung his claymore with renewed vigor. Despite harboring such blasphemous, heretical thoughts, the light encompassing his sword remained as radiant as ever. The divine power bestowed by the light did not wane. If anything, it felt brighter than before. Ah! Raphael exclaimed while gazing at the sky. He didn't need to check the fallen bodies of the Nur. The ominous aura they emitted could no longer obstruct the light. With a prayer in his heart, Raphael searched the dazzling sky for Eugene's figure. This is not heresy. Raphael knew this to be true in his heart. He wasn't greeted with any divine revelation, but he was certain in his fanatic belief. Eugene Lionheart could never be a heretic, even if he went beyond being the hero and declared a new faith. How could he be when the light, the parent of all, birthed and acknowledged him? To denounce such divinity as heretical would be the true blasphemy against the light. With this conviction, Raphael accepted his faith in Eugene and resolved to dedicate his sword to him as he had to the light. Dedicate his sword to Eugene? Ha! Raphael laughed at the resolve that had just formed. Would he even need my sword? Eugene's sword had cleaved through a dark light, or rather the demonic sword. Sparks flew as metal clashed with metal. However, they were formed from the clash of dark power with moonlight, and they left streaks in the sky, which were then engulfed by a brilliant light. The holy sword of light, Altair, shone brighter than any star of the galaxy enveloping Eugene. The brilliant light from the holy sword contrasted strongly with the dim light of the moonlight sword. It was truly a beautiful and reverent sight. That was how it looked on the surface, but Eugene's internal state was far from beautiful or reverent. Eugene spat out blood while cursing in a way he wouldn't in front of any others. The miracle he willed into existence had sliced through the demonic sword, but the incomplete miracle had its recoil on Eugene as well. The taste of blood filled his mouth as it refluxed from his stomach. The hand holding the moonlight sword tingled as if he was being electrocuted, and for a moment he felt a void in the universe within his chest from ignition's surge. Such was the power coursing through him. Even after using ignition and supplementing the lacking parts with a miracle, his body protested. But soon, thanks to the light that washed over him, the creaking subsided along with the crushing pain. Eugene wasn't the only one tasting blood. Mother. On the other side of the sky, Rhaenyra called the saints. She seemed restless, and the light surrounding Rhaenyra had noticeably diminished in intensity compared to before. "It's all right," Christina said as she wiped the blood dripping from her lips with the back of her hand. She chose not to turn around. She didn't want to show her bleeding state. But even without looking back, she knew what state the others were in. The priests of graceful radiance had divine relics implanted in their bodies, and each of them was worth 100 regular priests in terms of the light they carried. However, they were no longer able to manifest as much light as before. It was an inevitable outcome. Though the battle hadn't lasted long, they had expended immense power in the short period. Fortunately, no one had died, but some among them would not be able to join the upcoming holy wars. Whether it was 300 years ago or now, it seems nothing has changed. Anissa's voice emerged amidst the throbbing of the stigmata. As the saint, I never understood the will of the divine, the will of the light, until the very end. It was the same even when I died and became an angel. Upon regaining consciousness, she found herself transformed into an angel. But becoming an angel didn't mean she roamed paradise. Anisse simply existed as an angel. Christina had felt the will of the light before. It had come to her as a revelation. But was that truly the absolute will of the divine? Even now she couldn't be certain. It was just, perhaps the revelation was merely a pretext for being pushed into action. Appearing in Christina's dreams, guiding her to Eugene, leading them to the Samar rainforest, leading her to meet Sienna and at the Fount of Light. Was all of that truly the will of the light? Strictly speaking, weren't those all influenced by Anissa's own desires? Anisse swallowed hard as her imagination began to take form. One thing was clear. She had been the same since 300 years ago. She may have blasphemed the light, but she never denied its existence. But now... "Christina, give me your hand," Anisse said, forcibly cutting off her turmoil. Yet Christina remained unshaken even after sensing Anissa's turmoil. For Christina Rogerus, the existence of light was no longer of paramount importance. She was rescued at the Fount of Light. She watched fireworks with Eugene, received a necklace as a gift, and ever since that day, the swelling admiration and affection made Eugene shine brighter than any light for Christina. "Yes, sister," Christina replied as she stretched out the hand marked with the stigmata. Anisse also extended her hand in spirit form. Eugene stowed away the dimming moonlight sword and gripped the holy sword with both hands. The holy sword now shone more brilliantly than when Vermouth had wielded it. Light was pouring in. He could feel a light from a different source imbuing the sword. The light came from Rhaenyra's back, from the saints and the graceful radiance. This was a foolish act. Even Eugene himself thought so. Anyone would curse him and call him an idiot for his actions. "I know," Eugene said with a hollow laugh while raising his hand. Crackle. The connection between the saints and Eugene, woven by light, began to fade. "Sir Eugene." "Hamel, you idiot!" Christina called out in confusion, not fully grasping the situation. But Anisse, having experienced Hamel for decades, immediately realized what Eugene was planning to do. She realized why he would resort to such an action as she cursed. "For others, not me," Eugene quickly added before the connection was completely severed, knowing well the kind of profanities he'd hear otherwise. Soon after, the link to the saints was fully severed, and Eugene was no longer empowered by the power coming from Rhaenyra's back. You. The specter looked at Eugene with an expression of utter incomprehension. What on earth have you done? He was baffled by Eugene's decision to sever the connection with the saints. This wasn't just about Eugene no longer receiving power from them. Despite being the hero and the reincarnation of the war god, Eugene was still human. Humans were unable to fully handle the power they possessed, and they were prone to succumbing to its backlash. They were capable of wielding forces that could obliterate cities, yet susceptible to fatal injuries from the slightest touch of such attacks. This was why the support of priests was essential. It was the same 300 years ago. Vermouth, Hamel and Molen could confront the Demon Kings head-on because Anise supported them even while bleeding profusely in the background. Despite suffering broken bones, severed limbs or ruptured organs, Anise's immediate healing allowed them to continue the fight. Eugene had been acknowledged by the light. He could wield the holy sword and draw upon divine power. However, he wasn't particularly skilled in divine magic. While it wasn't impossible, his abilities in this area significantly lagged behind those of the saints, the experts. To put it bluntly, it was inefficient. It would be ideal for Eugene to channel all his divine power into offense and leave healing and other support to the saints and priests. But now Eugene had cut off all such support. Why? The specter couldn't comprehend it. He acknowledged Eugene's strength. They had battled fiercely and he had been pushed back. He couldn't deny that power. But without the saints' support, the specter would undoubtedly win if Eugene's focus wavered even slightly in the intense battle and if he got struck even once. Victory would be inevitable for the specter. I don't think a victory achieved with help is worthless, declared Eugene. Victory was simply that, regardless of the means. The same idea held true for war. That bastard Vermouth also killed the Demon Kings with our help 300 years ago, continued Eugene. He had been unbelievably strong for a human, and looking back, it made sense that he probably wasn't just a human. But what did that matter? In the end, Vermouth killed the Demon Kings with his comrades. And I'll continue to do so, said Eugene. But not now. Was it because of pride? That was partially true, but it wasn't the whole reason. Eugene had a reason for cutting his connection with the saints and not receiving direct assistance from Sienna as he had in past battles with the Demon Kings. Was it because he was alone? There's no need for next time. I can end it in this era. The extent of the Demon King of Incarceration's power was unfathomable. Eugene could not afford to be reckless as now in a battle against the enigmatic Great Demon King. It was possible that even all of his power, along with borrowed strength, might not suffice. If he could not defeat the specter, challenging the Demon King of Incarceration would lead to a predictable outcome. There'd be no variables. That was why he had to finish this battle alone without the aid of the saints. He felt that he had to win by himself without Sienna's support and without calling upon Molen. He needed to be strong, even more so given Vermouth's absence. I need to be stronger, Eugene resolved. Ignition was still active and honestly, Eugene didn't feel any lack of power. He still remained confident in being able to deliver a sure kill. I need to make sure I can experience that certainty, and you can die without any regrets. It has to be done by me alone without any other help, Eugene declared with a cold smile while holding the holy sword aloft. I've decided on that, so you'd better recognize it, he declared. What about the fact that he had been receiving healing assistance from the saints until now? That was hardly something to quibble over. He was battling an entity with an undying vitality, one that wouldn't die easily. Severing the connection with the saints was a handicap he didn't necessarily need to impose on himself. You're insane, the specter couldn't help but blurt out. He knew this was a mad act, a foolish move without any need. You'll regret this. Eugene didn't respond but gripped the holy sword tighter with both hands. Even after cutting off the connection with the saints, the holy sword shone brilliantly as he pointed it towards the sky. At that moment, both Eugene and the specter were struck with the same gut feeling. The end of the battle was near. Twilight would soon fall for one of them.